Okay, so today we're going to do another defense since before we do the Lucena, because since we're focusing on defenses, we should do the last basic one before we move on to winning ideas. Um, in this position, you'll notice that we can't establish the back rank defense because it's not a knight or rook spawn, so that's out. We can establish a Philidor because our rook cannot get to the 6th rank before his king, so we're left with the KH defense, or it's officially called the Kling and Horwitz defense, but I always say KH for short. And this only works on central and bishop's pawns. So and the reason for that will become clear later. So the first stage, well, first of all, you have to have the king on one of these two squares, like always. The king always has to be in front of the pawn. And the first stage is to put the rook behind this pawn. Okay. Now, white could play this move right now, but it's not the trickiest move. And this move will just transpose into the drawing variations later. So let's look at the trickier move. Now, if you guys had someone play this against you, it's very likely that you would play check, and check is losing. And if you're playing for white in this position, you should definitely play this move. And the reason is because the key of this defense is to have the rook behind the pawn. So if you can if you can get to this position, you're threatening mate. And his rook's not guarding this pawn, so the defense will break. But if he plays this move, just play your rook behind the pawn and there'll be no problems. So now, white will now go to this square, now that the trick hasn't worked. And now he's threatening mate. And here's one of the first parts of the defense that's really crucial. Your king will always have two options when this arises. You'll be able to go to either this way or this way to avoid mate. Remember, your rook has to stay here, so you have to move your king. Obviously, if you played this move, you would be forced into a back rank defense very quickly, and it would not be good for you. Or actually, I don't know why you did that. You could just take and then win. So, never mind. Anyway, so the trick to choosing the side is that your rook and king are gonna work on opposite sides. So you want your rook to have as much space as possible. So you want your king to go to the short side, the side with fewer squares, because there's some variations where your rook's gonna have to come to the sides and check, and it's gonna have to check on the side opposite your king. So you want your rook to have the long side. So here, let's say you play here, and then you get checked. Your king moves up, and now here white will have two options. If he plays here, don't check. That's losing. If you check, it'll go to a Lucena position, which I haven't talked about yet, but just trust me, checking is bad because of this move, and then the pawn will move up, and then it'll become a Lucena position, which we'll talk about next lesson. So the trick is, and here's the key to the defense, this move, and it's a very simple idea. You just double protect the square in front of the pawn, and he can't make any progress. And let's say, for example, that he just checks you again, and you go back. And we're at the starting position. And you might be wondering, well, why doesn't white just push this pawn? You know, like this. Well, why don't you pause the video and think about why this is a draw, okay? If you notice, this is a transposition of the Philidor defense. This is exactly what we talked about last video. It doesn't make any difference if the pawn is pushed first and then the king, or the king is pushed first and then the pawn. Now black will just start checking, and there'll be no place for white to go. And if white ever goes close to the rook, like this, black can just alternate to attack to the pawn, and the pawn will hang. So that's a complete draw. So you can't push the pawn. So why don't we go back and look at the other possibility. So we go to this, and now white plays this tricky move. And if you're the attacker, this is another trick you can try. And the idea behind this move is that the rook is X-raying this pawn, so it's defending it. So at some point, he can move his king out of the way, and you know, and try to make progress. And there's only one way for black to draw this, and that is to move the rook to the long side. And now, if you notice, this is kind of like what we just looked at, except the checks are coming from the side and not from the back. There's no way that white can prevent black from just checking you indefinitely. So, um, you know, this will be a draw by merit of these checks. Notice that if the king had gone to the long side, like this, if I had gone this way, in this case, it's a draw still, barely. But if this pawn were one square over, then you would only have one check, and then it'd be completely over, and you'd lose. So you have to have your king go to the short side. Let me see if I don't think there's anything else. Um, I think that's about it. So you just have to practice this. I went through that pretty quickly, um, but the basic idea is to put your rook behind the pawn, and if he threatens mate, you go to the short side. And when it comes to this juncture, if he moves his king out of the way, you just double attack the square, and if he puts his rook here, you go to the long side and check on the sides, and you can go round and round for forever, and you'll never lose. And I recommend you put this position, the original position, which I'll go back to this position, put it into your chess engine, Fritz or whatever, and just try defending. Um, so, all right, next lesson we'll talk about the Lucena, and then we can start building on winning endgames.